Hello, I'm Ashley and welcome to my space here. Today I come to you with the subject of the suppression of masculine sensuality and its effects on racism today. This is going to be a little follow-up from the blog post that I wrote, so if you are here because you read the blog, and thank you for reading. But if you just found this randomly, then hello and welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. So, as a white female, it's really hard for me to use my voice, but I feel like with this day and age, with it being 2020, I have to really remind myself that it is safe for me to use my voice. In fact, it's important for me to use my voice to speak about this subject. Even if I'm just learning, even if I'm just growing, even if I'm just expanding, I think it's important that we no longer silence ourselves, but actually start to have a conversation about these things. As a light worker, bring them into the light and bring them out of the shadows, because the more we continue to suppress them and bury them and keep them in the shadow, the more they're going to manifest, the more they're going to grow, the more these little ghosts are going to appear as apparitions in our physical reality to remind us of the things we're still repressing in our psyche. So it's our psyche that's why we still have racism. So that's something I want to talk about in my blog post. If you read it, I kind of took a twist on it, and what I'm asking you to do, and part of what I'm going to share today, is my own story with growing up and being abused by a white male, which would be my father, and what I'm asking and what I've wrote in my blog was to seek compassion for these white males that are committing these racist acts. And seeing these white males as the victims, and I know that's going to make you cringe, and I know that sounds like, how could you even ever perceive it like that? But I just want to have you stay open-minded and open-hearted to this information. If it resonates for you, if it doesn't, or if it evokes a lot of emotion in you or it triggers you in any way, then that's just something for you to heal and look at. So I'm just sharing because I deal with my own grief as a sensitive empath. I feel the pain and the suffering of the world, and after we saw that video of George Floyd being murdered by a white policeman, it evoked a conversation within my own mind. It triggered my own healing around white males and forgiving white males for putting their hands on me, for touching me, and I felt powerless, and this was happening to me as a child. So I wanted to really empathize and try to understand it, even just a little bit, because I know I'll never understand because I'm not a person of color, and so I've never experienced in this lifetime the racial injustices or inequality that people of color do face, because I am white and considered privileged. So what I want to speak about today is actually white privilege, and how it's the white privilege that are actually hurting and suffering, and that is why they are hurting other people, especially people of color. And so if we can learn to extend compassion and see that, okay, so a child is not born racist. We all know that. Children are not born racist. It is something that is a learned behavior. So can you see that cop or any other racist white male as a victim of psychological and emotional abuse from their caregivers who unconsciously brainwashed them or manipulated them to believe the same things they believe, and that's how racism still exists. And it doesn't exist in the ways that it used to. We don't have people hanging people by nooses in their front yard. We don't have the KKK and people burning things up. Maybe those things still exist in places that I have no knowledge about. I'm sure they still do. But it's the little things. It's the not using our voices, not speaking up. And I think back to our history, and I see now, because I was punished by a white male in my home if I had different beliefs, or if I said, if I would spoke up, or if I expressed myself in any way, if I used my voice in any way that wasn't liked, or it wasn't acceptable, then I was punished. I was not allowed to use my voice. I was not allowed to have differences. I was not allowed to because I experienced systemic racism in my childhood growing up, and it was normal to me. I just thought these things were normal because as a child, like I said, you're unconsciously brainwashed to believe what your parents believe, and if your parents are racist, then it's more than likely you're going to grow up to be the same way. Even if it's those little things, even if you're not out beating or killing or murdering black people, if you're still contributing to racist jokes, if you're still contributing to, pointing out differences or using the N-word or, just any derogatory term or any less than, or like slave jokes, or like, and what's really messed up and something that I look at is it's the white males that are slaves. It's actually them who were enslaved psychologically, and they projected this outwardly and created slavery as a way to off-put and to take their strong emotions of feeling trapped and enslaved within their own bodies, and they put it on to black males as a way for them to not have to feel it or not have to deal with it, and they made it their problem instead. But we see that it's it's all going to come backwards, and we're going to have to really unravel this little intertwine. Like, this is our past, this is our history, and I don't mean to laugh, but I want to bring a lighthearted energy to it as well, because it's dark and it's heavy, guys. I mean, even if you think of dark and heavy, think of like the Underground Railroad, think of slavery, think of our past, think of like the people that experienced, like, why I speak of like the sensuality, and it's the suppression of the sensuality that is really affecting racism today, is because when black men especially are standing in their power, and if they had the same opportunities that white men have, if we saw more black males that were in their power, that were taught to connect deeply to Mother Earth, to connect to their sensuality, because if you read the blog post, then you'll see that I was asking Spirit, like, what was the original, fear of like people of color, or why, what was the reasoning? And Spirit showed me this black male. And it's funny because I want to share with you, I have like a soulmate that I've incarnated with, and sometimes we wouldn't incarnate together at the same time. Like, one of us would stay behind and guide us from the spirit, and we would take turns, but sometimes we would incarnate together and we would come together in lifetimes. But anyway, I had a past lifetime where my counterpart was incarnated as a black male who was enslaved, and I was guiding him from spirit. And what happened in this lifetime is that psychological abuse from being enslaved still existed in this lifetime today. And he's not a black male in this lifetime, he's a white male in this lifetime, but it was the mind that was enslaved. And this was me as well, because we carry the same energy. So I had this really deep belief that I was like trapped in some sort of way, and it's because, and as I tapped into this aspect of within me, when I have experienced being a black male who was enslaved, I have to learn how to tend to this male and how to really connect deeply to my sensuality, to connect deeply with my body. Because if you think about slaves, their bodies were abused, their senses, their sensuality was abused, and like their bodies and their minds were abused. And if you abuse the mind and the body, then you're gonna feel this sense of imprisonment, this entrapment. And that's really how I felt as I began to awaken, that I felt trapped in my body. I felt like imprisoned in my body. And it's what's really messed up is that it's the white males that were originally feeling this sense of entrapment, this sense of imprisonment. And like I said, because they didn't want to deal with those uncomfortable feelings and unlock that it's really their father wound. And if we look back at white males, they have deep-seated father wounds that keeps them loyal to like racism, or keeps them loyal to these toxic habits or beliefs or behaviors, because they're loyal to, it's like the father-son bond is really deep. And so they will, their power comes from their father. They learn how to behave from their father. They will act like them. They will speak like them. They will behave like them. They will literally become a replica of them unless they do their own inner work to heal themselves and to really question these beliefs they grew up with. Because if you think of, even the cop, the white male, if you think about them as a soul before they incarnated here, they were whole. They didn't see race, so they were psychologically abused. And then what happens if you because I want to speak about this, it's like if you incorporate violence and racism in a home, of course you're going to create a product of someone who's violent and prejudiced, and this is what continues to show up in our world, is because it's actually these white males that are victims of inherited racism and are being emotionally abused and emotionally neglected by their father. So they're not operating from their heart space. And what I was shown when I was shown the original fear of people of color, especially in particular black males, was that when they were in their power, they were sensual, they were passionate, they led from their hearts, they led from their intuition, they led from Mother Earth, and they were powerful leaders that um, were leading from a place of unity, leading from a place of, caring and tending to the earth. But when we take that away, when we strip that of, because I think of the natives too, the Native Americans. I also have a past lifetime where I incarnated as a Native American. So I've incarnated in lots of lifetimes where I've been a person of color. And I have a video on this about my inner conflict with race and gender, because for me, I grew up and I was really disgusted that I grew up in this family, this white family that was racist, because, it didn't align with my soul. I didn't agree with it at all, but I was also unconsciously brainwashed to believe the same things my family believed from their ancestors and their ancestors and their ancestors, which go all the way back to a time in which maybe they were slave owners. And I know that I've been, I've had family members where you can just feel that energy of entrapment, and this stems back from a karmic past lifetime where it's like you maybe were enslaved, maybe you were a prisoner to them, or maybe they owned you in some way. And this really will give you the sense of feeling powerless. And what we're really looking to dig deeper to is to really, if we feel any energies of powerlessness, it's really the contrast teaching us unconsciously how to, or even consciously, if you're aware of these things, how to take your power back. And I think taking my power back is using my voice and not silencing myself anymore, not shutting up, and not being scared that if I speak up, I'm going to be punished. Because the one way I was able to relate with George Floyd was I was abused by a white male as well. It wasn't the same concept, but this abuse in this lifetime and incarnating into this patriarchal bloodline and this racist bloodline really helped me learn how to forgive and have compassion, because I had so much anger and so much rage from past lifetimes when white males were hurting me or hurting my family or destroying my land. And this really created deep-seated wounds, and I had so much hatred towards white males, and we think about the patriarchy, and there's so many people that are angry and mad, and we want to riot, and we want to fight back, right? But it's my observation from my experience that allowed for me to see this white male as a victim, and to extend them compassion, to extend them education, to extend them my opinion, to maybe share with them, that, and it's really bizarre because my upbringing, especially with my father, because he was taught this way. A lot of white males are taught to punish their children with violence, and they're literally just taught this from their ancestors because they were treated in that same manner, in that same respect. So if you take yourself back from the punishment, and you take yourself back from the anger and the pain and the grief you may experience when you felt powerless, when your father was hitting you, and you see that your father, or you see this you see this white male that was abusing George Floyd and murdering George Floyd, if you can see them as when they were a little baby and they were a little child and they experienced that hatred, they experienced that violence, somebody was hurting them, and because they grew up experiencing this hurt and this pain, they took it out on somebody else. And if racism was part of their bloodline and they were taught to be racist, then of course this little concoction of violence and suppression of their emotions, because a lot of men are told to, not express themselves, to not be in tune with their senses, to not be in tune with their intuition, to not be in tune with their heart space, to have, they have no leaders or teachers guiding them to really deeply connect with their emotions and their feelings, that allows for them to see love and that allows for them to see unity. And so their minds are literally distorted and diluted by their upbringing, by society, by our past, to believe these things. Even if we all know that they're wrong on some level, we have to see that because they were raised this way and they were born to believe these things, that their actions, their behavior, their thoughts and their beliefs about racism or about hatred or violence in general is normalized. It's something they literally believe is normal because it's something they were raised in. So that's my only thing here, is to extend these people compassion, these white males. And if white males were not being abused psychologically and emotionally by their elders, then we wouldn't have them. There would be less victims, not even just victims of people of color, but think of women that are victims of domestic violence. And another thing I want to touch on is because it's not just the men, it's also the women who never stood up, who never spoke up, who never removed their children from these homes where they were being psychologically abused, where they were being verbally abused, where they were being emotionally abused, where they were being physically abused. And because the mother was unable to be emotionally and psychologically stable on her own, and she couldn't see that these things and maybe she did see that these things were wrong, but she was still more concerned about her own being able to provide for herself, or not being able to do it on her own. And so she kept, as the mother, she kept her children in these homes where this psychological and this mental and this physical abuse was happening. So we cannot just blame it on our fathers. We have to, as women, we need to be leaders, and we need to stand up. And if we are in homes where the father of our children is emotionally abusive, physically abusive, verbally abusive in any way, then we need to remove our children from that home, no matter what it takes. And I know it's hard. I know that you have this deep-seated belief that you can't do it on your own, that you're all alone. And I understand that, because I had that same belief. And if I wouldn't have taken the steps to recover my emotional and my psychological well-being, then I would have attracted a man who was emotionally and psychologically unwell, and who maybe would have abused me or abused my children, verbally, psychologically, physically. And so really being able to, it's doing the work as the woman to really heal these beliefs about yourself. If you're not emotionally stable and you're not psychologically stable, you're going to attract a man who is the same. And so it's just a reflection of you. So it's really about the women standing up, and like they never said that. If you think about back then, and there was less, it was that survival state, so they needed a man to provide for them. They needed a man to protect them. It's 2020 now, and we don't need that. We have everything we could ever imagine and dream of to feel safe and stable as women on our own. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a relationship, or that you don't desire that. Of course you do. But you need to be stable, and you need to be healthy in mind, body, and soul, and in communication, and using your voice, and knowing who you are, and speaking up for these things that are wrong. And stop allowing your sons to be victims, especially your white sons, to be victims of this abuse, so they stop carrying it on and passing it on to generations to come, down to your grandchildren, and really taking the step. And if you take that step, you're redirecting history, you're redirecting your destiny, and we're shifting out of this paradigm of racism, we're shifting out of this paradigm of abuse and violence. But if you don't take a stand, especially as women, if you don't stand up, if you don't use your voice, and if you don't make those changes to protect your children, because it was our job to protect those children, and if we couldn't do that because we were too scared to do it on our own, or because we didn't have the means, or because we felt insecure, we thought we were going to be alone forever, and we didn't take the action step to protect our children, we are just as much responsible for not protecting them. And we need to forgive ourselves, and we need to have compassion, and we need to move forward, and we need to be better women. We need to be better leaders for our children, so that they don't grow up continuing to be racist, so they don't grow up continuing to seek hatred and division and hurt themselves. Because when they're hurting inside emotionally, they will seek to hurt other people because they can't carry it around, because their heart is broken. So, can we really learn how to extend compassion instead of fighting fire with fire and reprimanding these white males and, starting riots and I'm sorry, I just don't agree with it. I do believe we need to use our voices, but I believe these men, they need an outlet for their emotions. They need a safe place to go. And you know who that safe place is? Us as women. We need to be their safe place. We need to do the work so that we can guide them back to their heart, so we can guide them back to their emotions, so they can continue to live, and so they can learn to live in alignment with their hearts and their emotions, so they stop this behavior. We have to see them as victims of psychological and emotional abuse and of inherited racism, and extend them kindness, extend them compassion, extend them love, extend them empathy, and see them as hurting young little boys. You have to see that. If you don't see them as hurting little boys, if you don't empathize with them and you don't see them as your son, you're just going to continue to reprimand them, and you're going to continue to generate the same behaviors, the same violence, the same pain, the same hatred that got us here in the first place. So if those young men, those young little boys were treated with love and compassion and were protected by their mothers and their fathers, we wouldn't see them abusing people of color. We wouldn't see them abusing women, murdering them, whatever it is. We wouldn't see that because they were nurtured, they were loved, they were taught how to use their voice. They were taught how to nurture their hearts, nurture their bodies, to love themselves. But if these young little boys were not taught this, their minds can get very sick, and their minds can literally make them believe things that are not true. And from this place, they will continue to act because it's all they know. They do not know how to act from their hearts. So all I'm asking and all I'm suggesting with this little twist on my perspective on racism is to really learn to extend compassion. I think I've mentioned this before, but compassion is one of my biggest lessons, and I had to learn how to have compassion for my father, to really let go of those past pains and those past hurts from all those times he abused me physically, from all those times he abused me emotionally, neglected me emotionally. I had to learn how to forgive him and extend him compassion and see that somebody did that to him at one time. Somebody abused him and somebody neglected him emotionally. And because of that, he did the same to me. And that allowed for me to let go of my pain. I could still feel it when I mentioned in my blog post that I went for a run and I was releasing a lot of pain and a lot of grief and a lot of tension from my body, and I just started to bawl and I just started crying. All these memories of the times that I had been physically abused by my father just started coming. I felt powerless I felt so much anger in my body, so much rage in my body, but I couldn't say anything because I was unable to communicate. I was a child, and this kept me feeling very powerless and heartbroken. And as soon as and I mentioned this to my mom, I was telling her about this, and she's like, well, it didn't happen very often. And it's like that attitude that women have that keep their children stuck in painful dynamics, unhealthy, toxic environments. And it only takes once. The first time you lay your hand on your child, the first time you hurt your child, their trust is lost. So think about men. Think about little boys who get hurt, who are physically hurt by their fathers. The first time they experience that pain and that hurt, that physical pain, it's a betrayal wound, and they feel betrayed, and they feel hurt, and they feel angry. So think about this. If this happened to a child that's 2 or 3 years old, they're suppressing these emotions, this anger and this sadness and this heartbreak. They're keeping it all inside, and they're harboring it, and resentment grows, but they feel so loyal to their father that they can't act out towards their father. They can't hurt their father like they hurt them. And that's some of these emotions that came up for me. It's like all these voices in my mind that I wanted to say as a child came back, and they were screaming in my head, like, I want to hurt you like you hurt me. Why are you doing this to me? Stop hurting me, and all these, and I started crying because I felt powerless. And then when I was crying, I wasn't allowed to be sad, I wasn't allowed to be angry, and I was told to be quiet. And I would start to hyperventilate because I was crying so hard, because you cry to regulate your nervous system. So if your nervous system is in fear because you were just hurt physically by the person you trusted most in the world, then your nervous system is going to want to expel, and the only way that it can do that, one of the ways it does that, is through crying. And so that helps to soothe the nervous system. But a lot of children that are hurt or abused or slapped around or and I wasn't physically abused like a slave. I'm not saying that. I was slapped across the mouth. I was, my arm was forcefully grabbed. I was hit by the belt a few times, these are all things that I experienced that really broke my heart. And because I wasn't allowed to feel sad or angry afterwards, I had to continue to be loyal to my father. I had to continue to love him. I had to continue to listen to him, even though he hurt me, even though he betrayed me. And I kept all this anger and all this resentment lodged inside of me. And for women, they tend to turn it inward, and so I began to eat emotionally, and I was killing myself. I was suffocating myself because I felt suffocated because I couldn't use my voice because I didn't have any power, and so I felt suffocated, and as a result I was eating myself to death, and I was suffocating because my body was so heavy I couldn't, and so that's one way that I was able to empathize and really let go of these built up emotions, and to really learn to have compassion for my father and to forgive my father, so that I didn't have these resentments and these angers inside hurting me. Because like I was saying, as women, we kind of turn it inward, that anger and that resentment towards our fathers, we turn it inward and we beat ourselves up. But for men, it's a lot different. You have to think about men and women, they're completely different, species. And so you have to really think about, men are more extroverted, and they're gonna, not every man, some men will turn it inward, but a lot of men, especially men that are sensitive and are kind and gentle, they're probably gonna turn it inward because they wouldn't really hurt a fly. But think about other men who are extroverted and have a little bit more aggression. they're going to turn that outward, and they're going to create more anger into the world by, speaking very angrily, or, speaking racial, like saying like racist things that aren't, that just, they're going to be speaking words of hatred, because they're feeling so much hatred within inside themselves. Even if it's themselves they're hating, in order for them to relieve themselves of that internal hatred of themselves and that guilt within themselves, they have to push it onto somebody else. And then it relieves them temporarily. That emotion will still come back because they haven't dealt with it. They haven't gotten to the root of it. And so they'll continue to project this outward. And that's why a lot of men, you see a lot of men with the domestic violence, and they'll hurt the women in their lives because they're deeply hurting. So that's all I'm asking you with this little twist, is to see that this person, like, the reason people are hurting people is because they are hurting. And I'm not saying this is an excuse for the behavior. I'm just saying to not fight the fire with the fire, I'm saying we need to go in a whole new direction. We can't continue to extend them hatred and all the, what are we bringing? Like, how can we cultivate more peace? How can we cultivate education? How can we cultivate opportunities for more men to have connection to their sensuality, to their senses, to their heart? How can we create those opportunities for men, not just white males, but also people of color? So that's just my little tidbit. And something that I wanted to touch on, and something I wanted to say, because it's like, racism isn't always, I always kind of thought of it as like those big acts of violence that are happening, but it's really those little acts that add up to a lot. And it's just like those little jokes, or using, racial slurs, or saying those little things really adds up in the long run. And that's what's really creating racism still today, in my opinion, is the, systemic racism, and the things that we're not necessarily seeing like bold and in your face. They're the little things that are happening, like the injustices, like not getting paid as much at jobs, or like being denied certain things, or being looked at differently, or those are things that we don't necessarily see all the time, but are still happening kind of underneath it all. And so it still continues to exist, and it still continues to manifest as this hatred and this violence. And I'm just sending so much love to George Floyd's family, to anybody that's ever experienced any racial injustices or pain, and I'm sorry for what you've had to experience, or the things you have to go through, because I don't have to be scared to. Actually, I have been scared to go for walks out on my own as a white female, being scared of men in general. So I think it's time for us to really dig deeper into our fears around men, and really learning how to cultivate more love and compassion for men, so that they feel more stable, and we can be more of that mother energy, rather than that energy that is very cold and doesn't allow them to express their feelings. And if they had a safe place to land, if they had a safe place to express their emotions, to express their passions, to express their sensuality and their deep connection to the earth and to humanity, they would begin to heal their minds, and they would see the unity, they would see the wholeness of humanity. And from there, they would act differently, they would act new, and they would be leaders of a new generation for young men, to stand up for these things. Because it's the white males, and if you're a white male watching this, or maybe you want to share this with a white male, we need you guys standing up, speaking up, showing up, and being seen, and speaking about these things, and trying to make a difference in whatever way you can, using your voice, using your power, standing up and saying, I'm sorry, like, I'm sorry that my ancestors did this to you. Even if it's not yours to take on, even if you're not racist, it's still important to create a dialogue, to open up about these things, so that we feel more comfortable. Because like for me, like I said, it was really uncomfortable for me to speak about racism, but it's that silence of us not saying anything in the past that has got us to where we are now. So I encourage you to use your voice to educate yourself, or to just do some observation and studying about like racism, or even your own healing. Because for me, it wasn't necessarily like reading a bunch of books or educating myself in that way. It was really about doing my own deep ancestral healing. And as I was able to do that, I was able to uncover these little gems about myself, and to really offer them to the world, and to use my voice without fear of being punished or hurt. So I hope this was helpful for you. I'm sending you so much love, and I'll be back next time. Take care.